Right. Welcome to the deep dive. We're digging into some really interesting source material provided by one of you listening.
Yeah, this one's focused on hip-hop and rap culture. It's a personal reflection, really.
Looking at how lyrical artistry specifically is seen to have changed over time.
Exactly. Our listener shared this really compelling account. It contrasts what they call the golden era of hip-hop with how things feel today.
Okay.
So our mission basically is to unpack those observations, look at the perceived shifts in, lyricism, knowledge, that kind of thing.
Got it. So let's start there with this golden era. The author places it, what, early 90s onwards?
Yeah, that seems to be the time frame. And the picture painted is of young, aspiring rappers, mostly Black youth, NYC urban areas.
And what really stood out for the author from that time? What was the vibe?
Well, what's really fascinating and kind of central to the whole piece is this dedication to language.
Language.
How so?
The author describes people actually carrying thesauruses, reading dictionaries, like actively working to build their vocabulary.
Wow, okay. That's specific.
It really is. And it was all geared towards honing their skills for, well, the freestyle battles, which were a huge deal.
Right, and these battles, they weren't like, big organized events necessarily.
Not according to this source, no. It sounds much more organic, part of daily life.
Yeah, like where?
High school lunch tables, parks, street corners, just happening spontaneously. It seems like it was really woven into the fabric of things back then.
Okay, so picture the scene. How did it actually work?
Pretty simple, it sounds like. Someone starts beatboxing, or maybe there's a drum break playing somewhere.
Uh-huh.
And then rappers would trade verses, usually 8 or 16 bars each, back and forth.
And the skill was all in the moment, right? The wordplay, the rhymes.
Thinking on your feet, lyrically? Yeah, that was the core of it.
And how did you know who won?
That's the interesting part. No judges, no point system. It was pure crowd reaction.
Just the energy.
Exactly. Those oobgays the author mentions, or laughter after a really clever or cutting line. That's what decided it.
Which tells you a lot about what was valued, doesn't it? That immediate lyrical impact.
Absolutely. And what's really insightful, I think, is the author's point about the content of these lyrics.
Go on.
Even when dealing with tough themes, the author lists things like, gang banging, sex talking, drug selling, stuff society might frown upon.
Yeah.
There was often this surprising depth and truthfulness, challenging norms, reflecting reality. It makes you think, doesn't it? What was it about that time and place that fostered that?
It really does. And it's quite a statement when the author compares the impact, the staying power, to Shakespeare or Plato.
It is, saying that despite those potentially controversial labels, the words resonated, and apparently still do for people who grew up then.
Okay, so that's the picture of the golden era. But then the author shifts gears pretty significantly, right, to talk about now.
Yeah, quite a sharp contrast is drawn. The main point seems to be that, in the author's view, many contemporary artists in that same sort of genre, well, they don't seem to be using those same tools.
Like the thesaurus and dictionary habit.
Exactly. Or just that intense focus on reading and vocabulary building.
Yeah.
It suggests maybe a shift in priorities or what's seen as important.
The author puts it pretty bluntly, suggesting maybe a lack of knowledge in some cases. And that needs and wants seem easier to get.
It's definitely a direct critique, yeah. And the author links this to a broader cultural trend.
It is.
They call it culture's overall degrading of intentional listening and selective listening.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, the argument is basically we have constant, easy access to just vast amounts of music now, free or cheap. Spotify, YouTube, whatever.
Right. It's everywhere.
And maybe because it's so available, the way we engage has changed. Perhaps we don't feel the need to sit with one album, one artist, and really dissect the lyrics anymore.
Because there's always something new immediately available, so less deep engagement.
That seems to be the idea. It's more of a constant stream. And the author believes this has actually affected the structure of the music itself.
How so? In what way?
Specifically, song length. The claim is a reduction of at least 20%.
Okay, shorter songs.
Which means, naturally, fewer words. Less space for complex verses or storytelling.
Makes sense.
And they also mention music tempos slowing down generally, across genres, which again reduces the demand for, a high density of words per minute.
Interesting. And there was another point, wasn't there? Something about language itself changing.
Yeah, a slightly more out there point, perhaps, but they mentioned governments and educational bodies removing words from the lexicon each year.
Huh. So Kind of a societal dumbing down in their view.
It feeds into that narrative, yes. Painting this picture of a wider cultural shift impacting language use from multiple angles.
So if you put all those pieces together, the listening habits, the song structures, the tempo, the vocabulary.
The author's conclusion is pretty clear. They see a downward shift.
In what exactly?
Across the board, really.
Yeah.
Quality of the song, story, lyrics, rapper's skill, rapper's education level, rapper's artist knowledge. It's quite comprehensive.
It's a strong argument for a decline in the very things they admired about that earlier era. Makes you consider how all these different forces, tech, culture, maybe education, might influence art.
Definitely.
Now, the author doesn't just leave it at the music itself. They also talk about the bigger picture, the sort of cultural context.
That's right. They step back a bit.
Yeah.
And there's this interesting idea presented about how culture often gets shaped.
Which is?
That often it's the creative expressions of marginalized or repressed groups that bubble up. They innovate, they create something new out of their circumstances.
Right.
And then eventually that expression breaks through, it hits the mainstream, gets commercialized, and sometimes ends up driving huge amounts of, well, money and influence.
And hip-hop is seen as a key example of this.
Exactly. Born in the ghettos of NYC, as the author puts it. But its influence just exploded outwards.
It wasn't just music.
Oh, far from it. The author points to its impact on, everything. Sales models, business approaches, even theater scripts, and obviously everyday language, slang. It changed how people talked.
It really underscores the power of these movements, doesn't it? How something starting on the fringes can reshape so much.
Absolutely. Which leads back to the evolution question. If hip-hop had that much impact, how does its own internal evolution, as described by the author, reflect maybe wider changes in society?
Right. So let's sort of bring it together. The core contrast the author presents is stark. You've got the early days, that intense focus on linguistic skill, the thesauruses, the knowledge building, those fierce freestyle battles driven purely by wordplay.
Yeah, that whole culture around lyrical dexterity.
Versus the perception of the contemporary scene where, according to the source, those specific priorities seem less central, maybe pushed aside by other factors.
It certainly leaves us, and you listening, with a big question, doesn't it?
Which is...
Well, thinking about the author's points, what really does drive artistic evolution or cultural impact? Is it always that deep dive into knowledge and language, that mastery the author prized?
Or are other forces, maybe market forces, technology, changing audience tastes, do they play a bigger role now or perhaps always did in shaping what resonates and lasts?
It's definitely something to chew on. How does music change? Why does it change? And what does that say about us?
Indeed. A lot to think about regarding language, culture, and music's path. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.